This series of talks, The Process of Conversion, was recorded for St. Anthony Press. Speaker is Father Jim Basic.
Well, I want to welcome all of you to a series of talks on the topic of conversion. Conversion is an interesting word in itself. I suppose when a lot of people first hear it, they think, well, I'm into that. I understand this notion of conversion. I've undergone that kind of religious experience myself. Here in the United States, it's a familiar word, especially in Protestant circles. We've had our whole revivalist tradition going back to the Great Awakening, the 1730s and 40s in the United States, connected with the great theologian Jonathan Edwards. And we have that tradition of the tent meeting where people are brought together and they feel a sense of guilt and sinfulness before God, and then the priest reminds them of God's great gift of salvation, that grace is available to them. So when some people hear the word conversion, think they're on to tent meetings or this strong guilt feeling. I suppose that produces negative reactions in some people. I think in the own Catholic charismatic renewal in the recent past, thought more about this word conversion. There's a lot of people who have undergone specific changes in their life, a response to the call of God in which their life has looked very different, and they've changed their behavior, and they've been ready to witness all of this. So these are, I suppose, of the positive ways that the word is seen with the culture, and some people are very familiar with conversion, and they're interested to hear more about it. They think of it pretty much as a once-all event, something that has occurred in where God has spoken to them in a strong and decisive way, and now they're going to change their life and continue to honor the promptings of the Spirit. But I think there's a lot of other people who perhaps aren't into that word. Their piety doesn't encompass much thought of conversion. You can think of traditional Catholics who've grown up in the faith and have made their first communion, been confirmed, lived out the Catholic life, they go to Mass regularly, and so on, and they think, well, I'm doing pretty well. You know, I try to improve now and then, and I take it all seriously, but they just don't think in terms of conversion at all. And so I believe that we need to draw everybody into this topic, because conversion is really a crucial biblical notion, and it really is, I think, important for understanding the spiritual life. I want to talk about conversion more in terms of a process of gradual growth in the life of the Spirit, a process in which we become responsive to the call of the great God, a process in which we try to put on the mind of Christ and try to live our lives more in accord with the message and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. So I think if we begin to talk about conversion, not simply as a once-for-all event, but as a process in life of gradually trying to improve, then we're all into the topic then. Then I think that that's something that all of us who are serious about the spiritual life can talk about, think about, and get something out of. Now, I think that we try to see this in a very personal term, because I mean this series of talks on conversion to be a self-examination. This is not the kind of talk that one is listening to and hitting one's spouse in the ribs and saying, you know, listen to this, or you ought to shape around this point. I envision it more as a personal examination of conscience for all of us, sort of a systematic way of checking out our lives, seeing how we're doing, see where there's failure and limitation, and especially to get sense of ideal of how we could do better, how we might make improvement in this whole business trying to be better Christians. So it is a systematic way of going about that. I mean, a lot of us sort of do the spiritual life in a hazard way. We sort of drift along. Now and then we improve, maybe we take some steps backwards, but we don't think of it in analytic terms. It just sort of happens. Maybe we say we drift along. Now that can get to an extreme. It can be the kind of extreme where we wake up someday and say, I'm drifting for years. I haven't taken hold of my life at all. I haven't done anything worthwhile. I've never thought about what my faults are and how I might to improve. And I think that's a very bad thing. So part of what I would try to do through this series of talks is to call us up short, for all of those who are tempted to drift in life, to say, I better take hold, or I better look more clear here, better examine to see how I'm doing, and especially how I might try to make progress in my life. So I need it to be focused back on self. It is an examination of conscience. Now, that's a traditional notion we have. Many people have the habit of examining their conscience when they go to bed at night, sometime throughout the day, and saying, God, sorry for my sins, and so on. I think that that's a valuable thing. What I'm going to suggest is to put more precision into that, to do it in a more careful and nuanced way, perhaps, So we get this whole series of talks as an extended examination of conscience, an opportunity to see especially how we grow in the spiritual life. The first thing that I would need to point out is that development is part of our adult life. That sometimes we have the notion that the paradigm of the spiritual life is a little girl in a white dress making her first communion. You know, that is sort of the height of Christian spirituality. There she is, innocent and pure and good, and that sort of for after it will downhill. I think, too, there's another danger in which we think of the whole developmental process as working through childhood and adolescence up till you're maybe the age of 21, and then sort of seeding through the rest of life with what one has gotten to the point. And what we're learning about more these days from psychologists and various developmental theory, that there is development in the adult cycle. Well, there's process growth among adults. A lot of times people come to me, they'll say, you know, they're 60 years old and say, well, you know, is there any hope for me? Or I've lived this for so long, do you think I could possibly change? And I notice I have an instinct answer. I think you can change. That's the process of life. We all have that root capacity to grow and to develop. I don't think we're ever imprisoned at any point that we might be given time. That's one of the messages of the Christian gospel, that our God deals with us in an open way. What doors we closed, God open other door that we can through. The other premise that we need to have in mind, I believe, is to do with that we are multidimensional creatures. That is that we are people who function in various ways. We have, for example, an affective side, emotional creature. We're the kind of people who get angry and feel joy about life. We know love and we know sorrow. That's part of what we are. And under the heading I would call affective creatures. That's in a dimension of who we are. We're also intellectual creatures. We are people who can think and reason. Someone can present us with a problem and we can analyze it. We can do syllogisms, deduce conclusions from premises. We're able to look and synthesize things, pull them together, see patterns and wholes. So we are also intellectual creatures. We're also the kind of people who can say, I was culpably wrong there. Oh, I gossiped when I shouldn't have. I lied. I was not faithful to a relationship. We're also the kind of people who can say, yes, I was obedient. I acted generously in this situation. So we are moral creatures. We have a conscience. We have a sense that we are blameworthy for certain things we do. We say we're culpable. I did that. It's my fault. I'm sorry. And we're also able to say, thank you for the compliment. I think I did do that well. I functioned fine. You know, and we can take praise for that. So in that way, I would say we are moral creatures. And also, we're the kind of people who can look up into a starry night and say, thank you, Lord. We're the kind of people who can fall down on our knees and say, forgive me, Lord, for being off base here. We're the kind of people who can have a sense of awe and wonder about life, where life can seem vast and mysterious and fascinating, as well as being scary. So that in this way I would say we are religious creatures. We're the kind of people who can pray. Now there's a lot of other dimensions to our lives as well. We are imaginative creatures. We have a specific religious life. We respond to beauty. There's a lot of ways you could analyze the human being and our character and nature. But what I want to do through these series of talks is to look at 4 aspects that I tried to talk about there, and to see how we could undergo conversion in those ways. So I want to talk about an affective conversion, an ability to deal better with our emotional life. I want to talk about an intellectual conversion, how we can use our reason better, make better judgments, be more in touch with our experience, be more insightful people. And I want to talk about moral conversion in which we would move from vice to virtue, in which we would look for constructive patterns in our lives and try to build on those things. And I would like to finally talk about religious conversion, especially a Christian conversion, where we hand ourselves over to Jesus Christ, where we try to respond more faithfully to the call of God, where we try to be open to the workings of the Spirit within us, where we try to become more prayerful people, better Christians, more attuned to the message of the gospel. That's a religious conversion. So my whole purpose now is to sort of analyze us under those dimensions. We are affective people, and we need to deal better with our emotions. We are intellectual creatures, and we have to get our reason to function better. We're moral creatures, and we have to increase virtue in our life. And we are religious creatures. We want to become more responsive to the call of the Lord. Now, as I do that, it's really important to realize that these are dimensions and can't be separated out. I never function like a pure head, just an intellect. My emotions are always tied up with what I do. Our religious life has to be connected in with our moral life and our emotional life. We always deal with life as a totality. We come at it as a bodied spirit, as an integrated whole. And all these dimensions are always meshing together in one way or another. And we can't forget that. We respond to the call of God as a total person. We deal with the sorrows and joys of life as an integrated being. There's no way around that. So I'm doing an analysis. I'm cutting us up into parts, so to speak. I'm looking at dimensions of our existence, and in that way trying to understand how we might make progress, but always in terms of a total person response to the call of God. So that's the second premise that I believe is necessary if we're going to do all of this effectively. That is, if we're going to be able to understand this idea of conversion. It is a method of trying to see how we could improve in life, and to do so rather systematically. Now, let me take up the first of these conversion processes, that of the affective conversion or the emotional conversion. How are we going to deal better with our emotional life? Now, throughout this series, I'm going to be using stories that come to me out of my conversations and my spiritual direction and my counseling. What I always do is ask people if it's all right if I share these stories anonymously, and I've found people are always willing to do that. There's long as if they always say something like, well, if it'll help somebody else, go ahead. And so that is pretty much what I'm going to be doing throughout. Taking particular stories of conversion, sort of ordinary, common experiences maybe, and then analyzing them and see what we can all learn about conversion. But remember, it's not to look objectively at somebody else, it's to say, how do I need conversion in my own life? Now, I want to tell a story of a gentleman now. I'm going to call him Bill. And Bill is a person who is very unconverted emotionally when he comes to me. His wife really sends him in to see me, and his wife sets the whole thing up by saying, Bill is not responsive. I mean, he doesn't respond well to me. He doesn't deal well with our kids. He seems like he's dead to me. I get no response out of him. There seems to be no real emotions. I don't think he has any feelings, this man. No, they're all somehow repressed within him. I sometimes wonder if he feels anything at all. And she goes on to tell me that, it's really not good. I mean, he can't speak in any endearing ways to me. She says that I noticed that he can't hug his daughters, doesn't feel free to do that. I asked him to try to talk to our son about sexual matters, and he really just almost couldn't do that. It was just beyond him to speak in any kind of an open way with his own son about sexual questions. So this is the kind of build-up that I get to encountering this particular gentleman. His wife is upset and really sort of sending him in to see me. Now, when I talk to this man, he's a very good and rational and calm and cool and collected fellow. He's a successful man, a professional man, and doing well in his life. However, one begins to see a certain flatness in his whole emotional life. I hear that in his voice and in his responses. They're all very muted. And indeed, as the story goes on, he tells me that he doesn't feel much in life. That all the things that his wife said are true. He says, I love her, and I think, but he says, I don't know how to express it. He says, for the life of me, I could not bring myself to say somehow, I love you. He said that, he said that's true in dealing with my daughters. He says, I just don't feel spontaneously like giving them any sort of affection. And he said, in fact, I'm sort of dominated by my work, my life at work, that takes up all of my time. He said, I get pretty discouraged about that at times. That's one emotion that he knew. But he says, I don't often get excited about it or joyful. And so he says, for me, life is blah. So there's no doubt about it. So we began working together on all of this. We began trying to talk about emotions, trying to see what their importance was. I tried to get him to start writing things down. Whenever he did feel any kind of emotion, I asked him to try to jot it down, be in touch with it, try to examine it a bit and describe it as best that he could. I told him that I wanted, with all the people that he dealt with, to try to listen better to them and try to pick up when they were expressing some emotion and see if he could get in touch with that. So when his wife was really upset or frustrated, that he'd be able to hear that somehow in her voice or respond to it. So I wanted him to just be in touch with this whole general area of emotion. And then I wanted him to sort of program his behavior in some ways. I wanted him to try to pay his wife and his kids honest compliments. I wanted him to look for something that he liked that they did. And I always stressed with him, be honest about it. Don't make it up and just tell her that she looks nice because you think you should. But, you know, if you really have some genuine feeling going, some positive response to people in your family, or at work for that matter as well, then say it. Try to get it out and try to tell the person that you think they're doing a good job, and or that you felt something good about how they had conducted themselves. So that would be another way, always trying to get him to express. I tried to get him in our own conversations to tell me more about what he was feeling. So when he'd be talking to me, if I saw any glimmer of emotion, I'd sort of stop and say, well, what are you feeling now? And his general response was, well, I don't know. But then if I would probe after a period of time, then I'd begin to see, well, then he'd be able to tell me a little bit. Well, as time went on, I mean, he began to get better at all of this. I could tell he was looser in talking to me, so over quite a period of time he would be more animated. I could very often stop him and say, you know, what are you feeling now? And he'd be able to get out something about it. He began to be a little more expressive with his wife and with his kids. I think he even tried to talk to his son about sexual matters. He was scared to death, and he began by saying, well, I'm really frightened, or I'm nervous, or this is hard to talk about. And that just seemed to break the ice and was really a good thing. There was an interesting thing that came up early in this whole process, and that is the wife told me how she felt at Mass. They were Catholics, used to go to Mass together, and she always wanted him to give her a kiss at the greeting of peace. And he just could not bring himself to show that much emotion and manifest that sense in church. He just couldn't possibly do that. And so he always said that the therapy would be completed on the day at the greeting of peace, when he would spontaneously give his wife a hug and a kiss. And sure enough, the day came when the man was able to do that. And I was then that I said, well, I think you're on your own now. You know, I mean, you're able to move forward here, I think, in this whole business of dealing with your emotions. Well, now that story is put in polarized terms. In other words, I've tried to look at a man who was very unconverted emotionally, and then to move into a direction that is very healthy, I think. And that's sort of how I want to look at all of this, because he underwent what I will call an emotional or affective conversion, a change of heart, a turnaround. He did almost a 180 in a sense. No, he went from being out of touch with his emotions to being able to deal with them. And I think that's the way I would explain affective conversion. It's a moving away from repressing our emotions when we're not even aware of what we're feeling, when we're not even interested in them. We don't even care what we're feeling. It's just sort of there, and we're just totally out of touch. The unconverted person, therefore, suffers from strange and hidden impulses. It's the kind of person who represses their anger all the time and then snaps at people suddenly. And they say, well, I don't know, I'm going to hold my tongue. I'm going to bite my tongue. I'm not going to say anything today. And then, boom, it all comes out for apparently no reason. The emotion is repressed, and therefore it comes out in strange ways. The same token, the person would not know the well springs of their good feelings. The unconverted person wouldn't even know when they're feeling joy, when they're happy, when they're in love, when the heart is soaring. They would be out of touch with the well springs of that emotion as well. They'd be less likely to say, thank you, Lord, for the joyful feelings that I have now. So that the unconverted person is subject to self-deception. They don't really know what's going on in their head. They might be driven by unknown emotions, jealousy, for example, to just treat someone else terribly, treat them like a non-person, simply out of jealousy, and never really know why they're doing it, subject to self-deception. They would have very little guidance in dealing with depression. When they were down and despairing and in the dark moments, they wouldn't have a clue as to what to do. The unconverted person just says, well, I'm depressed, I feel bad, or they just walk around with a glum look on their face, but they don't have any tools to deal with it because they're not in touch with the emotional life. So also, I guess, finally, the unconverted person would be subject to swings of emotion, would be unable to control any of that, would have not a clue as to what to do when they were down in the depths and then suddenly feeling much better. There would be uncontrollable swings like this. So that's sort of a picture of what the unconverted person would be like. Out of touch with their emotions, repressed, they get in their way, they're not functioning for them, they're not even interested in what they're all about. Now, to undergo an emotional conversion, therefore, is to move to a whole other standpoint, a whole other way of dealing with life. Now, a person is interested in their emotions. Now they want to know what they feel. They want to probe them, get in touch with them. Now they can really experience them. So if they're angry, they can really feel angry. They can let it come. They don't have to push it down. When there's joy, they can let it come out and feel it and express it and tell their friends about it and their family. Now they understand what the emotions are all about. They know something of what causes them. They're able to name them sort of precisely. And they're able to accept them. They're able to say, yes, I'm jealous of her, but I'm not going to let that make me treat her in a non-civil way. I'm jealous, I know it, I accept that. And not only that, but someone would be able to critique their emotions. This converted person can look at their emotions and say, is it appropriate or not? So there's a tiny slight that someone says, they don't say hello to one, and one's mad at them for the next 3 days because they didn't say hello. And one would say, that anger is inappropriate. The converted person's able to say that. It does not make sense to be angry about that. I got to get at the bottom of this. Why am I bent out of shape over whatever has happened here? So they're able to critique their emotion. And finally, they're able to mobilize emotions for action. They're able to get their emotions to work for them. So maybe someone's sort of timid, and they're angry about the fact that someone else hasn't dealt with them correctly, and they use that anger to motivate them to get into action and to confront the person and say, I am upset with what happened. I am not happy with how this relationship is going. And they, in other words, they've mobilized their anger now to work for them rather than against them. And that, again, seems to be a really healthy thing. So the converted person now knows their emotions, they're interested in them, they understand something about them, they've accepted their emotions, criticized them properly, whether they're appropriate or not, and now have mobilized them to work for them. So I believe that this is, really a valuable kind of thing to learn in life. Now, I think what I'm going to do at this point is suggest that we just pause for a couple of minutes and give people an opportunity to think about this, because I've tried to set the stage for saying, am I in touch with my emotions or not? Am I really, where do I stand on the spectrum from being unconverted to being converted? which of my emotions am I out of touch with? So I think it'd be good here either to a minute or two of personal reflection or a group activity of saying, how are we doing with our emotions? So let's just take a little bit of time to do that now.
To take time for reflection, turn the cassette player off. Resume listening when you are ready.
I imagine some of you found in your discussions there that perhaps you are not all that interested in your feelings, that maybe you found out that you're not sure if your emotions are all that important, that whether you want to be in touch with them or not. And so maybe I ought to address that kind of question. I'm sure that's not a common experience, but I know there's some people who end up thinking along that line. And I'll remind you that our emotions are so important for our life. They're what gives zest and the chemistry to life. They're what keep us going. They make life interesting. They direct our attention and so on. You realize that a lot of times our initial response to experiences in life, our initial emotional response, guides our next steps. So, for example, we meet a person and we have an instant positive, warm reaction to them, a good feeling. And because of that, we want to pursue the conversation. Because of that, maybe we get together and talk again. Before long, we may well be friends. Precisely because I've responded to that initial, intuitive, warm feeling about the other person. And so very often our original emotions help us. Maybe sometimes we feel disgust as we begin to fantasize about various options in life. We might say, boy, I don't want that. I don't want to act like that. We have a disgust about, well, I wouldn't even like myself if I acted like that. We have an immediate clue as to morally what we ought to be doing and what we ought to be trying to do. So what I'm saying is that there's an initial response to the very worth of things and of people that we meet in our lives that are so important, and it's good to be in touch with those kinds of feelings. Another thing that our feelings do for us is help focus our thinking and acting. Let me give you an example of that. Suppose somebody has a real revulsion about nuclear warfare. They have a great actual fear of the nuclear holocaust. And of course there are a lot of people exactly with that feeling. Now what some people would be able to do is to take that feeling and translate it into action. So I know people, because of their fear, which many people would say is a negative emotion, have become tremendous peacemakers. They've been very involved in the peace movement precisely because they fear a nuclear holocaust for themselves, their family, their children, the people they love. Here would be a strong emotion that we usually generally think is somehow debilitating or harmful, destructive, and we could see how that mobilizes us to act in a particular way. So our feelings very often are what keeps us going. You know, that's why at times even guilt can function positively. A lot of guilt is neurotic, that's for sure. But there's also a positive, real, healthy kind of guilt where I say, I was blameworthy, I was culpable here, I didn't act correctly. And because I didn't act correctly, therefore, I have to change. I can't live that way. I have to do something different. So our emotional life really motivates us at times, keeps us going. It brings the spice to life. So anybody would want to start out by saying emotions aren't terribly important. Well, I would have to go back and say wrong. And that's what I tried to tell the Bill in the example that I used. My first step with him really had to be to convince him that it was important to look at his emotional life. He had been trained throughout his whole life to avoid that. They didn't talk about emotions in his family. He ran his business better without emotion, he thought. You know, he could be cool and detached and rational. He just sort of inside of himself thought that that's the better way to live. For him, emotions were something that were just appended to us, stuck on. They were more encumbrances. They were more something obstacles, something that would hold one back. The idea of mobilizing emotions for effective action, that idea was totally foreign to Bill. And so one of the things I had to do was convince him to begin with that, no, your feelings really can work for you. Now let me go on to another step in this that I tried to use with Bill and seemed to be important, and that is to get him to name his feelings precisely. Oh, it seems that when we grow up in any field, we become more discriminating. When we become more sophisticated, we're able to look at works of art and say, well, that's poor and something else is good. That becomes part of what it means to be a mature individual. Now, part of the emotional maturity that we're after here means being discriminating and recognizing our emotions so that we're able to name them precisely. You ever have the experience of waking up in the morning and feeling vaguely disquieted or upset? And if you're able to name it and to say what you're feeling and why, sometimes it will dissipate. I know I can do that myself, and I've talked to a lot of other people who can. Just by naming the feeling precisely and knowing somewhere of where it originated, it sometimes will go away. It's a very odd thing about feelings. And I think that's an example of what I'm saying here about the importance of being able to name it. And then that enables us, of course, to end up dealing better with it. Now, it is really difficult to categorize emotions, but I used a schema with Bill, and maybe it's a little hard to follow. I was able to write it out, and maybe he could do it better that way, but let me just try at least, because some of our emotions have to deal with direct responses to people or to situations. And other of our emotions have to deal with the obstacles that we encounter in life to getting to where we want to get. And just let me try to run through some emotions here to give you a sense of what it means to name precisely. So one of the first pairs we would have to deal with is love and hate, or maybe dislike if hate is too strong. So I wanted Bill to be in touch with who he loved, who he cared about, who he wanted to really do for, who called him out of himself, and to be in touch with people he didn't like. You know, he couldn't do that at the beginning. He didn't even know who he liked and who he didn't like, because he had so schooled himself not to show either kind of emotion. So first of all, love and hate. And then there is another pair, desire or aversion. There is the question of whether we want to be with somebody else, whether we like their company, desire, or whether we want to be out of their presence, whether they bug us when we're around them. So we have aversion to that. Incidentally, a lot what I'm talking about here is borrowed from a number of authors. I don't want you to think that this is just all coming out of my own head. I long ago gave up the idea of telling always where I got ideas, because I thought it would be better to say, if I ever have an original thought, that I would tell people. So I don't want it to sound as though all of this is borrowed, and I haven't been giving footnotes here or bows to people who have given me these ideas, but suffice maybe to just make that general kind of comment. The other kind of pair that we would find is joy or disappointment, or maybe sadness. This results from either being with the person that we care about or in the kind of situation we like, in the case of joy, or the sadness comes when we can't be there. We can't be doing what we would like to do, can't be talking to the person that we would want to be with. So we got to look inside of ourselves for both joy and sadness. And then there is another pair, anxiety or inner peace. Anxiety has to do with a certain fear about life as a whole, about life being undone, about being too much for us, of being overwhelmed, a fear of death, of nothingness. This we call anxiety. But then there's also another thing that happens inside of us when we're able to deal with anxiety. I'm calling it inner peace. I don't have a very good word for it, but what we know when we overcome anxiety, when we're now quiet with the world, things feel right, we know that we fit, all is well with the world, inner peace. Let's look for that as well. So those are all emotions that have to do with either being with another person, direct dealings with situations and people. But then there are another series of emotions that we might look at within ourselves that have to do with the obstacles to doing what we want to do or being where we want to be. Again, I needed Bill to try to look at all of this. One would be an example, the pair of hope or despair. Now, hope would give us a sense that, yes, you can do this. That's what I wanted Bill to have, a sense. No, you can become a better person. You can relate to your wife. You can get the chemistry back in this marriage if you work at it. I needed to give him hope. On the other hand, I wanted him to avoid despair. That's the idea that the obstacles can't be overcome. So Bill was in a position of saying, hey, I've always been like this. I always will be. I can't get any place. I give up. The marriage is going to break up. My kids won't relate well to me. That's despair. I needed him to get beyond that. Then there's a question of courage or fear. I had to play to this a lot. I tried to get him to act courageously and say, look, if you feel something good towards your wife, you got to say it. And he says, well, but I can't. I said, courage, man. Courage is what you need to step forward. Courage to talk to your son about sexual matters. You really have to get it together there. Be brave. Stand up. This is part of what it means to be a human being. So courage is the idea that we can overcome the dangers that threaten us. On the other hand, there is fear which becomes sort of irrational or inappropriate, a fear that can take us over and keep us from doing what we want to do. So we ought to be in touch within ourselves of that fight between courage or fear. And finally, in looking at emotions, there is the question of anger or peacefulness. So anger may well come to us when we can't handle the obstacles. So I'm really bent out of shape because I can't be with this person I'd really like to talk to now. The obstacle is there and I can't get around it, and that really upsets me. On the other hand, it's possible to be at peace with something like that and say, well, tomorrow we'll get together. Or I will overcome this particular obstacle in the near future so that we can relate in a better way, or so that I can have a better situation at work. Well, that's an attempt to look through a whole series of emotions there, and to try to name them precisely and to see what the struggles are. Very often there are those polar opposites pulling in different directions, and it's really helpful, I think, to try to get in touch with that. Now, you could do it your own way. You might have, there's a whole bunch of other emotions we didn't name. What I say is go back, and when you're feeling something strongly, try to keep wrestling with names. Try to say, am I frustrated, or am I angry, or am I upset? Exactly what is it here? And very often if we can get at that, and then the cause of it, I think we're able to function better. Let me try something else here, that a way of understanding this emotional conversion, and that is we have to move from repression to a healthy expression of our emotions. Now, repression in the common sense way of looking at things means that we push the emotion down. We don't let it out. We keep it from being expressed. I think it was Rilke who said if we repress our devils, then our angels will be repressed as well. In other words, if we hold down the negative emotions, the positive ones won't come out. Repressed anger means you probably can't feel joy in life either. So we have to look for that kind of repression. But there's another sort of technical way repression is used to mean when an emotion gets separated from its initial object and gets placed on something else. For example, in Bill's case, part of his problem was that a real negative feeling towards his mother. So he really had, I wouldn't know if hate might be too strong, but strong negative feelings towards his mother. So his wife, when she acts motherly towards him or tries to tell him what to do, he takes those strong childhood feelings of anger or hatred towards his mother and puts them on his wife. Now he thinks that he's angry at her when it doesn't really fit. So that's another example of a technical way maybe of talking about repression. Now, I think that in all of this we need to sort of get some of this out. I try to tell Bill about the importance of fantasy life, of letting his daydreams go. Daydreams often tell us what we're really feeling. I told him, the importance of the arts, of going to the theater or movies to be like a catharsis, like Aristotle talked about it. Get the emotions out. Get them cleansed in a way. That would be a good thing for him to do. I told him it was important for him to have confidants, that he probably couldn't keep talking to me all the time. He had to learn to talk to his wife about his fears and his anger and his frustration. He needed that confidant, someone ongoing. I told him that simple things like hitting a pillow when he's angry, Get it out, pretend like the pillow is somebody you're upset with, and just try to talk and express it, or go in a car and yell, or go walk out and hit a tree with a stick or something. Tear something up. I find some people enjoy tearing more than anything else. So tear something up. So we need this to get it out in one way or another. We need to be willing to admit that we have these deeper emotions, even if they seem strange to us. We need to bring them into the light of consciousness. And another thing I tried to tell them was that even when you know your emotions, you don't always say them. There's a proper suppression as well. Not repression, but suppression. That is, for example, I know I'm angry, but if I tell the person that I'm angry, they're going to be bent out of shape. It's going to ruin the relationship. They're too fragile right now to accept it. So what do? I play it down. I keep that in check in some way. So suppression might be something that is a more healthy thing to do. Sometimes I express and sometimes I suppress because I know it's going to create a more difficult situation. Now, as I'm talking about all of this, it seems to me crucial to place it ultimately in a religious framework. That is, the reason that we can face our emotions is because God made us this way. And God knows I'm angry even before I would ever express it. And that there is this whole notion that God loves me as I am. He accepts me even with jealousy and anger and hatred in my heart. And He enables me to overcome that. So by facing it, then I'm able to mobilize it. I get some sense of this mobilization from Jesus Christ. Take the cleansing in the temple, for example. It's important to remember Jesus was really angry. He's upset. And He used that to move Himself to do a really important symbolic act, to throw out the money changers, to show the people that He was on their side, to challenge the religious establishment. So Jesus Christ ends up being for us in this situation, I think, a model of proper use of emotions. Not that He denied His anger. He was angry, upset, that He used it to really do something symbolic, something important. Well, we've been talking about emotional conversion here. It's a personal invitation to everyone present to say, where do I stand in this whole business? How much improvement do I need to make yet in my own life? In what ways am I unconverted? Which emotions won't I look at? And how could I get more in touch with them, use them appropriately, and mobilize them to really lead a constructive life? This is part of what it means, I think, to be a converted Christian person.
All rights to these talks are reserved by St. Anthony Messenger Press, 1615 Republic Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45210. This talk was recorded for St. Anthony Messenger Press. The speaker is Father Jim Basic.
I want to carry on our discussion now on this whole topic of conversion. Now, conversion often is thought of in terms of doing a 180, in terms of a total turnaround, so that someone is totally living in sin and now suddenly they're living totally in a virtuous life. The word conversion means to move in another direction, to turn around, to go forward in another way, and to make a complete kind of change. And so I think that when we begin to talk about conversion, we have to make sure that we see it in some other way, because a lot of people would just say, well, that's not me. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not that bad, and I probably don't have any hopes of being that good someday. And so instead of thinking of it just as a complete 180 turn, that maybe we need to see it as sort of a slow revolving process, or a process of gradual growth in life. So that, as Karl Rahner once said, that every conversion that we make in life or achieve or happens to us is really only a beginning. So conversions are beginnings, not ends of things. They are points along a process. I often think that our life is punctuated by important moments. I mean, we go along, there's a lot of routine and daily things that are happening and so on. But now and then important things happen. The spirit sort of percolates to the surface. We make a move. We decide to do something in a better way. Those become high points, important points for us in life, but they are still part of a process. So any conversion we would ever undergo would be part of some sort of larger thing. Now, in Catholic circles, we've not had in the past a whole lot of writing about conversion. In Protestant circles, it's always been a very big term and important idea. They have sensed the sinfulness of the human condition. Part of the Protestant understanding of the world has been a strong sense of original sin and of the corruption of human nature, and as Calvin went so far as to say, the depravity of human nature. And because they had such a strong sense of sin, following the line of Augustine, I suppose, and a lot of Paul's thought, the sin of the world and the sin that infests our heart, they really had a strong sense as well of the need to turn that around, to move away from it, to make a decisive sort of change in life, to become a converted person. So naturally the revivalist movement and so on grew out of that Protestant sensibility. But often for us Catholics, we've been more sacramentally oriented. We've been more oriented to the goodness of human nature, the fact that we are graced, that we are divinized creatures. And there's been less sense of this need for conversion as a result. Now, there's been a change in all of this in Catholic circles as a result of the work of one very great theologian, Father Bernard Lonergan, who some would say the greatest North American theologian that we've ever had, 20th century figure, born in 1904, died in 1984, and wrote two very important books, one called Insight and another called Method in Theology. And while in Insight, Lonergan did not say a whole lot about conversion, much of what he put in that book did lead people to think about the question of conversion. And then when many years later he published his master work, Method in Theology, then in there's all kind of references to conversion. As Lonergan got older, he understood the importance of conversion as being the basis for what we are as Christian people, that the real basis for theological reflection was the converted life. So Lonergan has led us now into an era when there's a whole lot of important and good writing about conversion. Many of his disciples have written fine books along this line. David Tracy talked a lot about conversion. John Donne in his work draws on that whole tradition. So without multiplying authors, I would just make the point that a whole lot of the literature today really is dependent on Lonergan. And if one is able to understand that, then we're able to move forward, I think, and appreciate much of what we find in the contemporary authors. I might say this about Lonergan, that he was very big in the beginning in his work Insight on intellectual conversion. And later on, he became more interested in religious and moral conversions. But only very late in his life, I think all the way up to around 1980, before he really understood the importance of affective conversion, of the emotional side of things. So if we're looking for enlightenment from Lonergan on conversion, the very first place to go is his book Insight, and then his whole notion of intellectual conversion. And that's really what I would like to talk about in this particular lecture here, the whole idea of becoming converted intellectually. Now, I'd like to go back to a story, one that's quite striking to me. This is a story of a priest who was in a class of mine. It was a graduate course on theology, and it was actually the theology of Karl Rahner, and we were reading Rahner's great masterwork, Foundations of Christian Faith. And the priest came into the class not too pleased with Rahnerian thought, to say the least. He wasn't terribly open to contemporary theology. He had been a pastor for many years, and a very authoritarian one by his own admission. He ran a tight ship in his parish. He was very classical in his orientation. He had learned his theology in the seminary, and I think he had taken it very seriously then, and he'd lived with it ever since. You know, for I don't know how many years, 30, 40 years as a pastor, he was working out of this Thomistic, classical, scholastic theology that he had learned as a young seminarian. It hadn't really changed much over those years. And in fact, he had a certain antipathy towards the modern theologians. He felt that they were cutting in on Aquinas' space, that they were almost heretical in a way. They were saying things that were opposed to the way he was trained and the way he thought that you really ought to function in life. They seemed like those people were undercutting his relationship with his people in his parish. He had parishioners who were reading this stuff, and they were becoming more rebellious and wanted to think on their own and so on, and this was creating all kind of problems for him. Well, he came into my class, and as I say, I would term it rather antagonistic. He would challenge much of what we were reading about Rahner. He would ask very difficult kind of questions that had a barb to them or a slant that let me know that he didn't think much of the direction we were going in. And then, as we were going on in the course, I began to sense a little bit of change in him. And I noticed there was a different slant to his questions. He more opened as though really as to what this was about. I asked students at the beginning of class, any pages read on they create a sign. I was not seeing it the science or not. But I noticed that he all read as neat as were on. He began to discuss outside class, looking for suggestions and so on. He became genuinely interested in the subject matter. He began wrestling with it. He began really engaging himself with what Karl Rahner was saying. Very difficult theology, totally opposed to what he had learned in many ways, a different framework entirely, and he was trying to work his way into that. It was a great example of somebody really setting aside their own categories, their own lifelong way of looking at things. I think the man was in his 60s, and really giving this whole thing a chance. Well, as he comes down to the end of the course, he tells me that this course has been extremely important to him. In fact, he's called it one of the most important things that ever happened to him in his whole life. That it has changed his whole outlook, that he sees things very differently now. And this was a summer school session, and he told me, he said he couldn't wait to get back to his parish and begin to put a lot of this into practice and to begin to relate to his people in a more democratic and open way and a less authoritarian and rigid fashion. And he said to me a poignant statement. He says, "I only regret is that I came to this so late in life. And I wonder if my people will accept me in this way." Well, I mean, it was a beautiful kind of thing. I mean, it was an amazing reaction. I must say that I have encountered this in other cases. While that may sound strange, and it is a striking kind of thing, I have noticed very often in teaching classes like that people will have minor kind of conversions like that. They will change their thinking in some very radical ways, that they will adopt a different framework, that they will have a different interpretive scheme now for looking at life and knowing who they are and where they fit in the whole divine-human relationship. So this priest, seems to me, really underwent what we would call an intellectual conversion. Because he was responsive to the material, because he gave it a chance, because he stayed open to whatever was going on, he really changed. Now, he did one of those 180s. He did a complete turnaround in his theological outlook from being down on contemporary theology, upset with it, fearing it. He now became an advocate of it, open to it, thought he could employ it to help lead his people better as a pastor. That is a real intellectual change. Now, let's try to see what this all involves. I could put it in various ways what intellectual conversion is about. For one way of saying it is that it is to move from sort of a common sense understanding of life to a more intellectual one that employs theory. This is one of Lonergan's sense of what intellectual conversion is. To be unconverted means that one doesn't have any critical sense about one. One simply thinks in common sense terms. That one just goes along with sort of a grade school understanding of things. That one is not thinking for oneself. One just assumes a worldview that has been gotten from one's family or one's religion or whatever. It isn't challenged in any way. It isn't thought through. To put it in maybe in terms that more go along with the story of the priest, to be unconverted intellectually would mean we would have a theology that doesn't work for us really. To be unconverted means it doesn't work. This is the kind of person to be walking around and saying they go to church on Sunday and they say they're Catholic, but if their kids pressed them and say, well, what do you believe, Dad, about that? Or, Mom, what do you think about this? And they'd be unable to articulate it. They'd fall back on something else. They'd either answer dishonestly and say, well, the church says this, or I was taught this, or they'll fall back on something that's really in their guts, that they really believe, and say, well, out of my experience, this is what I think is true. So this is a problem we all have, and not just professional theologians. To be converted, on the other hand, would mean that we move into a situation where our worldview feels right to us, where we feel integrated. It's not now on the top of one's head, but has been brought down into one's heart. It informs one's mind. It becomes our normal, natural way of looking at the world. It forms the core of our very being. And that this worldview that we have now, or this approach to life, is now critical. That is, I'm able to look at it and say, this is good and this is bad, and this needs developing. In other words, I now am not just walking around with it in an unreflected way, but I'm able to see its elements. I'm able to check it out. I'm able to see where I might have to do better and develop it in one way or another. So what are we doing then? In intellectual conversion, we're moving from common sense to be able to use theory. And people do that. In other words, it's one thing to be able to say, how do you balance your checkbook? It's another to understand the dynamics of family economy and how one might be able to function better. There's real difference in that. And that is what it means to be intellectually converted, to be able to see principles and patterns and so on. And the other point I'm making is to be intellectually converted means we've got a system now that works for us, something we can rely on and that makes sense to us and that is been greater development. Let me try to parse that out a little bit, just to speak in very general terms. I think that what I do is pick it apart now. Maybe I've already jumped into a little too much a general statement about intellectual conversion. Let me back now and try to take those various parts and pull out and raise them and look at them more carefully. First of all, intellectual conversion from a passive and rigid acceptance of this average way of viewing the world to sort of a long quest for truth and it creates a dynamic. In other words, the conversion now is in a pursuit of wisdom. Right? Wisdom is a rich word. Wisdom is a synthesis of heart, of practical and theory. It means love and knowledge are fused together. It means that we stand life on great principles of the deep underlying roots of things. Wisdom puts on search finally God. If we're searching wisdom, we're searching ultimate truth. And the thing about the word wisdom is that it's hard to say that one has knowledge on it. Some people may know all the truth. Art has the truth. Art has the truth. Religion is in light and everyone else is dark. Some people say the truth. There's not too many people who say we possess all the wisdom in the world. We almost do a sense that wisdom is a broader word. Wisdom's got to do something that always exceeds our grasp, something we're moving for. Wisdom is the deepest all springs of the broadest principle that guides that. It is to have heart, knowledge, love in fruitful dynamic synthesis. So wisdom is a good way of thinking. So we move sort of an average way of thinking where we're in a round, same thing going on over and over. In dynamic, exciting thing now after truth. Now I'm dedicated to truth. I settle for falsity. I want true to myself, to my drive to understand. That Reagan was big on. That all of us a drive to understand. That we really want to get a comprehensive point of what the world is all about. To be converted means faith to that. We to a standpoint where we say, I won't settle for shoddy thinking, I won't settle for falsehood. I have to be true to my conscience. I have to be true to this search for something greater, which is called wisdom. Now, if we're able to, in this direction, we really convert, then we are able to enter into dialogue with others. No, we understand that people got wisdom also. Other people know things about life. I don't have a monopoly on wisdom, and I know that, but I'm seeing for it, so that's up a way I relate to people. I relate to in a dialogic way. Dialogue becomes a tool. Now I want deep conversation. I want to talk about what's important in life. I want to hear your points on. I want to hear what churches have, the religions, their worldviews, Marxism, whatever it is. I'm open to it. I want to discuss this. I think all that as we do that, we're searching for a truth greater than one of us now possesses. We're searching for wisdom that's beyond our capability to monopolize it. So that part, and I'm just not confident. Really converted and know where they stand, what they know and what they don't. not threaten other people's opinions, and therefore they'll enter into very open and easy conversation. Now they learn from the because they're defensive as they go about it. Conversion means to pursue wisdom and truth with a degree of confidence. On the other hand, to be converted in this way means that we can live relativity without becoming mindless or unprincipled. The world is plastic. There are very few points from which we try to get wisdom. There's no one of looking at it. That can really some people. They can't put up with this. It's too much to handle. I can't. I need to be more secure. I got to know right. I got to know what it is. Be converted intellectually means that we handle relativity. We know it's the ways in the world. We realize there's different perspectives. I know mine is limited. Mine is important. But I won't give up my principles or just say one thing good as another in the search for truth. You got your truth, mine, there is to it. I realize I have to sort it out, that there's things that are shoddy, that aren't well thought through, that aren't intellect sound, measure up academically, and I have to be able to stat out and list all of that and try to look for it really as sound and healthy, moves in the direction of wisdom. So the first kind of that I would want to spell out here, I suppose, in this whole intellectual conversion is this sort of general notion moving from a passive, average, common sense way of view the world to this dynamic search for truth and wisdom, for a satisfying philosophy of life. Or I want to be able to enter into dialogue with others with confidence and to live with relativity without becoming mindless and just letting go of pursuit of truth. Now, I think I'm going to take a break at this point, and I think often that throw out all these ideas, it's almost too much, it's too fast, it's hard to assimilate all of that. And so I think if we took a little break at this point, allow you to think about it, try to go over what I've been saying, try to write down a few notes, might try to talk to another person about it, but try to express yourself. I see it as a couple good things. One, it stops my voice for a while. And the other thing it does, it helps you assimilate what I've said, always in a personal way. So the invitation really is to go back and say, well, with that general guide in there, how am I doing intellectually? Is my life all and routine, or do I have excitement? Ask yourself, is there any idea you've been excited about lately? When you think of a conversation recently where you're stimulated with it and wanted to go and read a book afterwards, into a lecture where you really want to pursue the ideas, there would be this general question, where does the stand intellectually? Is your rational side developed at all? We'll take a couple minutes to that now, and then turn and look more specific.
To take for reflection, the cassette player off. Zoom list when you are ready.
Let's go back now to try to get more carefully this whole intellectual conversion all about. I'm reminded of the great work of Bernard Lonergan in his book, Insight. In Insight, Lonergan was trying to show us how to achieve certain self-transcendence, that is, how to go in a systematic way. And he devised a number of, transcendental rules, put it in better terms, general principles that should guide our whole effort to become more critical thinkers, to become better people, to achieve, in short, I think, an intellectual conversion. And he said the first rule was that we be attentive to our experience. And I'm going to talk about each one of these. The second was that we should be insightful or be intelligent. We should be inquiring and see patterns and gaining insight into what is going on with our experience. And then he said we should be reasonable, make good judgments. If we're able to do all of that, that would lead then to a life of responsible behavior, in which the fourth rule would be responsible. Live a good life in accord with validated insights that you've achieved. So Insight, in a sense, is a long, large book, and difficult reading, but it is a commentary on intellectual conversion. It is a very specific and careful, detailed outlook on how to become converted intellectually. Now that is going to be my guide in trying to parse out this intellectual conversion, and again, taking it back to personal experience, saying where am I weakest of this and where do I need to try to improve. So I would specify it in this way. To be intellectually converted means to move from inattention to our experience and a rather static and narrow base of experience or data to what I'd call a critical attentiveness in which we gradually expand our knowledge. Okay, to be unconverted would be like the priest. He wasn't attentive to the experience of what was going on in his parish. He wasn't drinking in from it. He wasn't learning from what they had to say. Their experience was sort of ruled out for him. They were just people to sort of be kept in line and to be dictated to and pour in the truth that he had learned into their sort of empty heads, I suppose. That's a hard characteristic. The man has a good man out him. And a little harsh, but you could move in that kind of direction. See, where the database is narrow. He's not drinking in enough reality. The other part of his experience, I think, that he largely ignored was his own. That is, what it felt like to be a pastor of these people. What was he learning? What was going on inside of himself? It's like the theology he had would not permit him to be open to all aspects of his whole experience here. He's working with the same stale, static theology throughout all those years. Now, very practically, that means when he gets up in the pulpit, it's probably hard to find something new to say, because there's not that growth and development in the experiential base that he's trying to work out of. Now, not just for him, we're not looking at this particular pastor especially except as a catalyst for our own reflection. That is, I'd have to ask the question, what parts of my experience do I screen out? There's so many people I meet throughout the day, so many people I interact with. How much of that do I really notice, attend to? Or how much just passes by, fast pace, rat race going on, experience is fleeting and dense and hard to get a hold of, and I'm really not with it. It's just sort of all going. So at the end of the day, if you ask me, to slice it up a little bit or look at it a little bit, I don't know. I didn't attend to it. Yeah, I drove down the street, but I didn't see anything. Yes, I talked to this person, but I never heard what they were really saying. That is to have this narrow, unconverted base of experience. Perhaps it means that we have not expanded it through reading, through discussion. Perhaps we're still working with the same outmoded principles about life that have long ago failed to sustain the new data. Long ago, those models that we've had have been too narrow, and the data's been straining to get us to change or to think in a new way, but we refuse all of that. Very often there's a strong emotion involved in that. That is, there's a fear to change the worldview. There's a real anxiety about coming up with a new philosophy or a new approach to this whole thing. It's just too difficult. It might mean I have to change other things then. So this priest, if he was going to adopt a new theology, then he's probably going to have a parish council. And then he's going to have to dialogue and go to meetings. He's going to have to do all kind of new things if he even lets this crack open, in a sense. So it's possible, I suppose, that we would say, to sleepwalk through life, to not notice. And we all do this to some degree. Some of us are worse than others. Some of us don't notice emotion. Some of us don't notice beauty around us. Some of us are not in touch with nature. Some people don't read books, don't stay up to date with the news. All kind of ways that we can be unconverted and narrow our base of experience or fall into the trap of not being attentive, failing to attend to what's going on. Now, the converted person obviously turns this around. Now they are trying to do positive kinds of things in their life. They're trying to pay attention to experience. So when they walk outside, they purposely look for the sunshine or the flowers, and they try to notice that. It's an interesting thing that there's a Buddhist meditation techniques ask us to look very carefully at one thing. For example, you might take a leaf and just very carefully look at that leaf, just for a long period of time. Try to see all the aspects of it, see it from different perspectives, see what's really there, see what's behind it. Somehow I'm thinking of Gerard Manley Hopkins' notion of inscape. We have seascapes and landscapes, and he talks about inscapes, the inside of things, the inner reality of our world. That maybe what we're trying to do is be attentive to that in this intellectual conversion. It means that we go about the business of gathering information. For some people, it might mean reading Time magazine, or watching the news, or listening to All Things Considered on NPR, or going to a lecture or something. And that in this whole process, that one is trying to do it rather critically. I encounter this with people who say, yeah, I'd like to learn about theology, but there's so many books. Where would I ever start to read? And maybe one would do that sort of critically and get advice. I mean, I have certain people that I call when I am going to do a lecture on the peace pastoral or something. Then maybe I call a well-known moral theologian and ask him his advice about what to read. You can't read everything. So I don't see anything wrong with seeking out people with expertise around us. That seems like sort of a good thing to do. You don't have to make long-distance phone calls. There's usually somebody around or some source available to figure out what we might read. To be converted, then, in this way, is to get excited about the new things that are going on. It's to begin to notice where I didn't notice before. People who become converted affectively often get off on this. I mean, boy, they are so excited about it, about what's going on inside of themselves. They're in danger almost of too much introspection. You know, they start looking within, and wow, this is an interesting world in here. I sometimes wonder if that's why people are afraid to be alone. They're afraid to be alone because there's nothing exciting going on, because there's nothing new. It all seems programmed and stayed and set. Whereas if we're expanding our experiences, probably all kind of things inside of us that are happening and in the world around us as well. In a sense, it was like the priest. He told me when he was reading Ron, he said, how come you read so much? He says, I can't get enough of this. You know, he wanted to get more books about it. He wanted to listen to tapes about it. He just couldn't get enough of it now that his interest was somehow wedded along this line. So I believe that part of the conversion that's needed intellectually is to expand our experience base. Now, I don't mean to do that in a foolish way. I mean, I think there's a sort of idea along that line that says, you know, you got to go out and sin in order to know what sin is or something. You know, you got to go out and just compulsively seek new experiences. That's not what I have in mind at all. I have in mind walking through our day with our eyes open. I have in mind encountering people with an open heart so I can drink in what they're all about. I don't think you had to add anything specifically, you know, and run around compulsively find new experiences. It can all be very ordinary, I believe. And what we're trying to do is sharpen our awareness along this line. You know, I'm thinking of some ways of doing this. I think that keeping a journal is helpful. Now, the man who was out of touch with his affective experience, what I wanted him to do is start writing these things down. So if he felt hatred, get it down. If he was somehow not in touch with the joys in life, try to record it in his journal. So I believe journal writing would really be a very helpful way of going about this whole idea of being intellectually converted. How about doing a guided reading program? Get a series of books on how to read the scriptures, or get somebody to get a particular commentary and read through the Bible in that way. Perhaps people could go to a conference in their field so that they could improve in some way in their performance. All of this to say that part of intellectual conversion is you got to have something to work with. You have to have grist, substance. That comes from our experience, and I think it comes from being more attentive to what is going on, often the ordinary things in life. Lonergan's first rule is be attentive if you intend to be intellectually converted. Now let me go on to another aspect of this, following out his second rule, really, and that is to move from being anti-intellectual to prizing, treasuring intelligent insight. Now, the unconverted person in this regard sort of distrusts reason. You know, they laud emotion, and there's sort of a romantic spirit in the air today. You know, feeling is what really counts. You know, get in touch with your feelings. But reason is out. Reason will just get in the way. Reason is something that ends up harming us because it shuts off our emotions. I consider this to be unconverted in this intellectual way. Well, it maybe comes out in people who say, I can't stand to deal with logical people. You know, so let's turn the example. Say this man comes to me and says, you know, I can't stand it with my wife because every time I try to tell her how I feel about something, she analyzes it. And she goes through it and, you know, tries to explain it all. And all I want to do is to say what it is. So I can't stand being around logical people like my wife. You know, it's too rationalist, and it's set the whole feel that reason is something bad, that logic is a negative factor in life. It comes out religiously among people who say, well, just read the Bible. Don't try to interpret it. You know, you don't need interpretation. That's theology, man. Just read it and let God speak to you. Anti-intellectualism. In college we see this, universities. People not there to learn, they're there to get credits, so they can graduate, so they can get a good job. There's anti-intellectualism even in the academic world. And I think in certain circles in the church, to say the word theology produces a little snicker. They think theologians are eggheads, people who live in ivory towers. I guess we have to admit that's true at times, no doubt. But there comes a whole sense out of this that theology is something bad. That's some of the elements I see of an unconverted person here. They look down on reason, look down on theology. School is simply something you get through. You read the Bible without any interpretation and so on. Now, to be converted means that now we're passionate about insight. We want to see it. Lonergan begins insight by telling the story of Archimedes coming out of the baths. He discovers the displacement of water theory, comes running out of the baths naked saying, "Eureka, I see it." And that becomes, I think, this excitement about insight. To be able to say, wow, this is great. Now I see the pattern. I've put it together. I understand what's behind it. It now seems so simple to me, and this can really move my life. That's how the priest, he couldn't wait, in a sense, to get back to his people. Couldn't wait to put into practice this insight that he had gained throughout this summer course. I suppose the converted person is always asking why and how. They want better explanations of what's going on. They want better models that cover all of the data. They want stories that really pull it together for them. I think that the converted person tries to understand what the other person is saying before they make judgments. They don't jump in right away and say, that's stupid, or that's a brilliant idea. They wait and they try to understand before they make judgments in dealing with people and reading books and so on. In higher education, if we really had a converted mentality, we'd be striving for critical thinking. We'd want people to learn how to think for themselves, how to parse things out, how to make sense out of their world. And I think that religiously we would see the conversion when we would see theology as being secondary but important. Faith would be the most important thing. That's what really counts. But theology would be good to reflect on that faith, to help us appreciate it and value it, to help us to know how to interpret the Bible, to get at the deeper meanings that the author had in store for us. That's what I think is important about being converted in this way intellectually. Now we value insight, intelligence, theology, critical Bible studies, and so on. They work for us. They're not in the way of emotion. They release emotion. They help us to become fuller people. I suppose one of the keys to moving in this direction and really accomplishing this is to suspend judgment. Try to understand first. That's our common thing. Jump in too soon. Stereotype. Put it in a box. Think I got it figured out. The key is understand first, then make judgment. You know, I think it'd be great if people would just read one book carefully. Get a really important book and underline it, write in the margins, really grapple with what the author has to say. Maybe in conversation we could do better with this. Let's just listen to each other better. Let's try to hear behind the words. Let's try to get at the meaning of what they're trying to convey to me. All of that, I think, is a way of increasing our insight. You know, it might be helpful, too, to be aware of some of our failures in life and to see how we get off the track. Let me take up one more of this specification of this, and that would be to move from a rigid dogmatism to reasonable judgments. So the unconverted person here thinks their opinions are the truth. There's only one way to look at a question. All my insights are valid. There's no need to test them. You know, my way is the only way. This is what I would call a dogmatism about life. We all encounter people like that. It's hard to dialogue with them. We don't like to be around them because they know it all already. And what I'm saying is that to be converted here would mean to understand pluralism and the relativity of my own position. As I said, it would be to be at ease with that relativity. We'd realize that in a lot of cases we couldn't get certitude about anything, about a particular matter. We would have converging probability. I'd be able to act on something even if I didn't have it all figured out. I'd be able to act anyway. Now, I'd be realize that I'd have to revise my judgments, that new experience and new insights would come, and I'd have to rethink this whole thing. Theologically, I would realize that I need an interpretive scheme which covers as much data as possible. We'd have to know that we'd have to have a way of understanding the Christian faith that really worked for us and that made sense and inhabited my head and my heart and didn't just sit on the top of my head. It really would work for me. I think that in trying to improve in this way, it would help us if we would talk to people who are different from us, travel a little bit, study another language, learn the history of a particular question. But most of all, what I think is important with this is to wrestle with the great questions. To be intellectually converted means I take the questions of freedom and love, of death, of all the great matters in life, and I wrestle with them. I don't expect certitude, and I don't expect easy answers. I really want to get at them. I let them roll around in my head. I let their emotional impact touch me in my guts. I really try to get in touch with these great questions and work out the best kind of response I can make to them. That's something, again, of what I would mean by an intellectual conversion. I'm not so sure that this is the most exciting part of the conversion process, but it's crucial to it. Bernard Lonergan has led the way. He's reminded us that to be fully alive, to be a self-transcendent creature means that I'm thinking, I'm searching, I'm probing my experience, I'm having eureka moments now and then, I'm getting excited about it. That's intellectual conversion.
All rights to these talks are reserved by St. Anthony Messenger Press, 1615 Republic Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45210.